Just a note that this podcast may touch on difficult themes and include some challenging conversations, so please take care when listening. This is The Widow Diaries, a podcast that holds space for the often unspoken stories of grief, love and life after loss as a young widow. I'm Caroline Winter, and like so many, I've been on this journey. So come with me each episode and hear from others who've also walked the winding path of widowhood in their own way. The Widow Diaries, for First Light Widowed Support, where no story is the same and every story matters. Well, being a widow at 37 definitely wasn't part of my life plan. It was 2013 and my husband Richard went out the door one day and he never came home. He had a heart attack and died suddenly, and my world turned upside down. I spent days and nights online trying to find answers, trying to find meaning and trying to find some connection. But little did I know that in another part of Australia, Rebecca Adams was doing the same after the sudden death of her husband just 6 weeks after their wedding. Beck is the co-founder of First Light Widowed Support, and in our very first episode of The Widow Diaries, she shares her story of heartbreak, healing, and the power of turning pain into purpose. Beck, thank you so much for being a part of The Widow Diaries.
Thank you for having me, Caroline. I'm very excited to be chatting to you today.
And you are the first in this new series, which is really exciting, and there's good reason for that because you are one of the founders of First Light Widowed Support. We're going to talk a lot about that shortly, but first I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your life leading up to 2013 and, your work, your dreams, your relationship.
So, yes, as obviously I was widowed in 2013, but prior to that, I spent most of my 20s travelling, living overseas, just having a wonderful time. And I met my beautiful husband, Daniel, when I was 30 in 2011. So I think we'd both been living our lives and having big adventures and had gotten to the point where we were ready to settle down and try and find that special person. So we met on a dating website. And after a couple of dates, realised that we were really into each other, and things kind of went from there. He was just everything I didn't know I wanted and deserved, and he was just the kindest, funniest, most amazing person I'd ever met. So, yeah, I felt like I'd found my person and this was it. The rest of my life was ready to go, and I was just so excited to share it with him.
And so what was that time in your relationship like in the early days?
It was just so much fun. We had so much fun together, just doing everyday things. One of our favourite times of the week was just the Friday afternoon where you'd finish work, you'd get home and he was there, and whether we were watching TV and getting takeaway or cooking together, just spending time together at home if we didn't have an adventure planned. It was just so much fun. Everything was better with him, and he'd felt the same. He often spoke about the fact that he felt like maybe he just wouldn't be the marrying type. He'd had relationships and he had gazillions of friends and a wonderful family, and he was just incredibly independent and happy by himself. And he started to question whether he just wasn't cut out for love and a relationship. But when we met, we fell pretty quickly, I'd say. I remember a period of time where, the occasional dates every week or two had gotten to catching up a couple of times a week. And soon enough, it was almost every day. What are you doing tonight? And should we go to your house or should we go out? And we just really wanted to spend a lot of time together. And I remember one evening I'd made plans to just stay home and catch up on laundry and personal admin. And he must have sent me a message around 7 o'clock and said, "I'm just really bored. I don't know what to do and I miss you. Can I come over?"
Oh.
And we were just so happy to have found each other, and just really excited to spend our time together.
And so I guess that developed into, what those dreams would look like as a couple going forward. So what kind of conversations did you have about that?
We'd spent a lot of time getting to know each other's families. We had really similar families of origin. We wanted the same things in life. We were both very family orientated. We'd, as I said, done a lot of traveling and had a lot of adventures, and we knew we wanted that to be part of our future together. But we were just really excited to create a home together. We bought a big house, ready to fill it up with children. Dan proposed just before the 1 year mark of our first anniversary, and we started planning our wedding. We were just really excited to sort of start that life together and build a family together.
So speaking of that wedding, what was that like in those first few weeks of marriage? What was that like for you?
I was just absolutely in honeymoon bliss. We had a beautiful wedding in Brisbane, and he had family travel from Sydney, and we both had friends travel from all around the world. I think we had about 80 people there, and it was just all of our favourite people coming together and spending time together. Everybody was just so excited to celebrate with us. We went on our honeymoon to Thailand and then got back home, and I had just finished up a job and was about to start a new job. Spent a lot of time those first few weeks pottering around at home and just really enjoying saying, this is my husband, Daniel, and I'm now, Mrs. Collins. And I just felt like everything I'd wanted had finally come to me. And I couldn't imagine anything being any different or anything going wrong, I guess.
And unfortunately, then it did. Tell me about the moment that everything changed for you.
So 6 weeks after our wedding, Dan went to work and just didn't come home that night. And I started to get worried at around about 6:30. He wasn't answering his phone. And I think, this is a bit strange. I thought maybe he has had a car accident or maybe something's happened and he can't get to his phone. So I called my sister first of all and a close friend and said, I'm starting to get a little bit worried. I eventually called the police link number. I thought maybe he was in hospital and people didn't know how to get in touch with his next of kin. So, it was a very scary time, really quite stressful. A lot of questions, wondering where he was, why wasn't he answering his phone, sort of fearing for the worst. Eventually, when I called the police and reported him missing, they had found his details in their system and they sent police officers out to our house who told me that unfortunately he had died that day and he died by suicide, which was just a complete shock for me and the friends and my sister there with me, but everyone who was with us at our wedding, all of our families and friends. He was just the least likely person, I think, for that to happen to. He had been diagnosed with depression a few weeks earlier, but we felt like he had it in hand and it wasn't that big a deal in that he wasn't at risk of hurting himself. And as I said, he had so many friends and so much support. It kind of wasn't really on my radar that it was something we had to worry about. We did have conversations around him starting medication and some of the risks around that, but he assured me and his doctor that he felt really safe. So when he was missing for those few hours, it wasn't really something that I had considered might have been a possibility. It wasn't until the police said those words that just my world fell away from underneath me, and the shock of losing him as a newlywed, but then losing him to depression just took my breath away, and it was incredibly shocking and incredibly painful.
Oh, I can't even imagine. I mean, as you say, it's not just losing someone, but it's everything else that goes with that, and particularly when we're talking about suicide. What were those first few weeks and months then for you in trying to come to terms with all of that?
Gosh, it's been a little while now, so it takes me a moment to think back to that time because it was such an incredibly difficult time. As I said, I was going through the process of be of the newlywed, changing my name, building our lives together. So all of a sudden I'd gone from his fiancée to his wife to very quickly being his widow. And it was such a difficult concept to get my head around. I think I didn't know any other young widowed people. Actually, the only other widow I knew was my grandmother in her 90s. And it took me a little while to realise that word actually applied to me. I was about to start a new job, so I actually, within a few days, I was due to start. So I had to call my new manager and explain that I wouldn't be able to come in on Monday. And they gave me about 4 weeks to just take some time for myself to work through all of the administrative and emotional process that I was navigating to see whether they wanted to hold the job for me, which was very kind. And honestly, I just felt like I didn't know where to start. I felt like I didn't fit into my life anymore. I'd lost my entire identity. Not only had I lost my husband, but I'd lost the person I was building a life with, all of our plans together. My whole future was mapped out at that point, and I lost everything. I just felt like I'd never be a mum. I didn't know how to fit into social situations. I really felt like I'd lost myself and my entire future.
Oh, Beck. And, so many of us know exactly how that feels. And where to start is kind of the big question. Like, who can help me here? And you mentioned your grandmother, being a widow, and in your 90s or your 80s or maybe even your 70s, that's kind of what you expect in life, but not in your 30s or your 20s or your 40s for that matter. So where did you look for support and how did you find support?
I think I turned to Google within a day or two because I was really struggling. I just was struggling to make sense of what was happening to me and how to navigate it. I just felt so incredibly overwhelmed by the pain and nothing really made sense. So I started Googling words like young widow, Australian widow, suicide widow, and I think I was looking for a fact sheet or a website with some information on steps that I could take to start understanding what was happening to me and start to process my grief. And I was a bit surprised that I just couldn't really find much information. There was no course that I could complete. I think I just really didn't really know where to start. I started trying to read books. As I said, I Googled and I found online support, like online forums on Facebook where other young widowed people were coming together and chatting about how they were processing their loss and how they were navigating that. But I think I was a bit surprised. I'd never considered what support a young widowed person might need, or any widowed person, but particularly a young widowed person who was navigating that stage of their life where, we just signed up for a big mortgage. I was still having to navigate work, income generation to pay the bills. We didn't get the chance to have children, but I've since met so many young widowed people who were also trying to parent, whether they were pregnant at the time or had young kids. It's such a difficult stage of your life where you lose the one person your teammate who you would normally be making big decisions with and overcoming challenges with. You've lost that person that you rely on the most. And then on top of just general craziness of life, you're now navigating this incredible pain and devastation and lack of identity. So I did, during my search, find a website for an American organisation, a wonderful charity called Soaring Spirits International, and they had programs and resources for young widowed people. And I joined up to their mailing list and I started reading their website, and I thought this is what I was looking for, and they had programs and events. So I reached out to their founder and said, I live in Brisbane, Australia, but do you know of anything like this on my side of the world? And she wrote back and said, no, unfortunately, we don't know of any similar organisations in Australia, but you're welcome to be part of our community. You're welcome to come and attend our events if you can get to America. And I decided at around the 1 year mark that I was still really struggling, and I made the decision to travel over to San Diego and attend their conference, which was called Camp Widow, which is not the most welcoming name. I'm not really a camping kind of girl, so
and you didn't want to be a widow either.
Certainly didn't want to be a widow. No, it wasn't the name of a place that I was excited to visit. But I was excited about the opportunity to connect with others who were navigating this horrible experience, but also hear from speakers and facilitators and attend workshops around some practical tools and try and find some sort of motivation and understanding that my life wouldn't always be as incredibly painful and difficult as it was at that time.
And Beck, it's hard enough for anyone in the first 12 months or even beyond that, you know, to go out to a cafe around the corner from their home. You got on a plane and travelled to the other side of the world to meet a bunch of strangers, albeit with a similar story in some ways. But how were you feeling like when you got on the plane and you knew kind of you were actually doing this?
I actually don't think I gave it enough thought.
Maybe that was a good thing.
Yeah, I was just really focused on, I need to do something. I'm not okay. And, you know, it's been a year. I'm still really, really struggling. I'm so deeply unhappy. And I couldn't imagine a life for myself where I wouldn't just be so completely unhappy. And I think it was a little bit out of desperation. I thought I have to try something. So, I didn't really give it too much thought until I walked into the room the first morning and saw 300 people. And I'm actually a bit of an introvert. I'm not super chatty in big groups anyway, particularly about something that is so personal and traumatic. So I did have this moment of, oh my goodness, what have I done? This is a terrible mistake. I need to go home. This is just too much. But I sat down and then I listened to Michelle's opening speech, and I think I started to tear up and I started to feel really upset, and the woman next to me just handed me a tissue and said, I feel the same, it's okay. And then I thought, right. And I think I pretty quickly got the sense that I'm not the only widow in the room. I'm not the only person who's feeling like this. I'm not the only person with a really horrible story. At that point, I'd had so many experiences where I'd met someone new, whether it was through my new job or a social situation, and conversation inevitably turns to your personal life. And at that time, I think I may have still been wearing my wedding rings. And, you know, people say, oh, you know, you're married, or are you married? And you have to sort of say, oh, I was, but my husband died. And I'd had so many experiences of having this difficult moment of, oh my gosh, here we go. I'm going to let this big cat out of the bag, and who knows what reaction I'm going to be met with, whether it's going to be awkwardness or pity or horror. But I found that when I was...
you have to carry that reaction as well, don't you?
Of course, instead of navigating my own emotions, all of a sudden you're comforting a stranger. That's right.
So true. So you're in a room with people where that wasn't the case.
That's right. It was immediately removed. You didn't have to, you know, to start a conversation with how long it's been since your person died was so refreshing. I could almost take this mask down of pretending that I was okay, or even with those who were really close to me and incredibly supportive, they couldn't really understand, as hard as they tried, they couldn't really understand what I was feeling. But when I spoke to another widowed person and said, you know, I'm really struggling with this particular part of my loss today, or it really sucks that, you know, ABC, like this is really hard. Having someone reflect that back to you and say, oh, I know, me too, was just so validating. And I felt like, okay, I don't have to pretend. And in fact, I don't have to try and stem the tears and keep it together, because everybody got it. But I think one of the things that surprised me the most, but being at this event, I guess I maybe was a bit nervous that it was just going to be so depressing, all these big sad stories, so much pain. And I was really struggling just to carry the weight of my own loss. So how am I going to meet all these people and hear all of their sad stories? But really quickly, I felt like such a lightness, because I was able to I felt free of the expectation of someone not understanding my grief. So I was actually able to have a laugh, or, have a bit of a light moment, and it felt okay. There was no confusion or judgment. It was just really, I felt like I was in this safe place, and all these people got me, and I was able to talk about my loss in a way I hadn't been able to until that point.
Wow. So was that trip, I mean, would you describe it as transformative for you?
It was, I think, in so many ways, because not only did I find some resources that I hadn't found here in Australia. I also got to hear speakers who'd gone on to rebuild their lives in different ways, whether that had involved repartnering or not. I remember sitting in audiences listening to people speak about the most devastating losses, and then seeing that whether it's 3 years on, 5 years on, 10 years on, they were really living really full, happy lives, and they were okay. And at that point, I still quite couldn't understand how I was going to be okay, but I could see these people and I'd seen that they'd made their way through, and it gave me a sense of hope that I wouldn't always be where I was in that moment, and that maybe I would one day feel peace and joy, and that my life would be a lot fuller again. I think I hadn't quite believed that until I attended that event.
Was there a particular turning point at Camp Widow that firstly, I mean, it sounds like that moment that you just talk about in terms of I am going to be okay, don't know how I'm going to get there, but I will be okay. But was there a turning point where you had that realisation that there were other young widows in Australia who also needed to benefit from this kind of event?
I think so. I think at the end of the event, which is a 3-day conference, I left feeling so different. I mean, I still had the same loss, my grief. I hadn't been cured. I still missed him incredibly, but I felt like, okay, I think I'm going to be okay. And wow, how incredible was that? And my first thoughts were, I wish the friends that I'd made back home could come. Obviously, it's a huge undertaking to travel to America. As I said, I didn't have children, so I didn't have childcare issues to worry about, or the logistics of leaving my family behind. But I had this feeling, this urge that I wish all of the widows I'd met back home in the Facebook support group that I joined, I wish they could attend too. And I realised, well, that's really not practical. There's so many widowed people in Australia who haven't experienced this. And I had a conversation with the founder of Soaring Spirits, who runs Camp Widow, Michelle Neff Hernandez. And I said, I really hope, well, my hope is that one day your program can come to Australia so that more people can access it. And she said, I do too. And I'd love to work with you to help you bring it to Australia. And I think at the time, as I said, I'm still 1 year in. I just turned 34 by that point. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like something that's going to be really unachievable. But she said, look, I'm happy to coach you through it and mentor you through starting an organisation in Australia so that you've got the infrastructure. It has to be a charity so that you can fundraise. You need your not-for-profit tax-deductible gift recipient status. And I didn't even know what that meant. I had to Google what is a charity, how to start a charity. But she said, I'm willing to work with you on it if it's something that you really are serious about trying to achieve. And I was so passionate, but it felt like a bit of a pipe dream. I thought I'd love that, but at that point too, I was still so deep in my own grief. It became a little bit of a wish that one day Camp Widow would come to Australia, but I just didn't have the confidence that I would be the person to do it because I had so many things I was still working through.
Of course. So the idea, or at least the nub of the idea and those conversations happened while you were there, but you did certainly start an organisation to help Australian widows, and that is First Light. So what did the early days of building First Light look at? Like, where did you even start?
I think I just didn't stop talking about it. So this was 2014. I came back to Australia and I just kept banging on about this Camp Widow to my friends and my family and how great it was. And another year later, in 2015, I actually went back a second time and I attended the conference again. And at that point, I was still struggling a little bit with my grief, but I was in a different place. I knew that there was a way forward for me and I had that hope, but I still needed some more tools. I was still navigating different issues. Around the 2-year mark, I think I started to consider the fact that one day I might like to repartner. I just turned 35 by that point and I really wanted to be a mum, and I didn't know how I was going to navigate opening up my heart again. It still felt incredibly scary. I missed Dan so much, but I wanted to go back to Camp Widow and attend different events. The way the conference worked, where there'd be 3 or 4 different sessions happening simultaneously, and you just choose the one that was most relevant for you. So I wanted to go back and have the experience again, but I was able to take a couple of my friends with me this time. I think they got sick of hearing me talk about this conference. So Lauren and Karen came with me, Lauren Leslie and Karen Stapleton, my co-founders of First Light, and they shared that experience of attending the conference And we started talking about, yeah, wow, that was amazing. So let's have a think about what it might take to start a charity. And when we got back, we Googled, we sat in my lounge room floor and Googled how to start a charity. We started chatting to people who had gone on to create organisations to support different causes and looking at the logistics around starting a charity in Queensland, what paperwork was required. And it started off quite slowly, like a little project, and then over time it just really grew from there. I think we just chipped away at it when we could and just didn't give up.
What was your vision for First Light at the very beginning? Like, what were you hoping it would achieve?
I think at that point, all three of us spoke often about how we often felt so misunderstood and so unsupported in general by being widowed at a young age. I was widowed in my 30s, but Lauren was widowed in her 20s and Karen was in her 40s. And we just really struggled to find a lot of support in mainstream areas. If we attended events and spoke about being widowed at a young age, it was just so uncomfortable for people. So we really wanted to create an organisation where widowed people, but particularly young widowed people, could feel seen and understood. They could connect with others, because I'd had at that point a lot of counselling. I'd done a suicide bereavement course. I was still seeing my counsellor regularly, but I'd read books and I'd done a lot of work to try and process my grief. But it was the peer support that I found from connecting with other young people that really helped me find that hope and that support of the fact that I wasn't the only person and that there were others navigating this situation. And then that gave me that sense of I'm not alone and there are others going through it and they get it. So we really wanted to build an organisation that would be a starting point for others like us who had Googled young widow or Australian widow, that they would find a website as a landing point with some information, give them the knowledge that they're not the only person, and here's a few really practical steps that you can take, and here's a community that will walk with you.
Mm. Having Karen and Lauren must have been an incredible kind of support network, because when you find yourself widowed at a young age, it's, as you say, it's just not a stage in life where you're talking about it, you're even thinking about it. So how did that trio, I guess, having the three of you, help galvanise and make First Widow a reality?
I think we had different strengths, luckily. So Karen was our secretary. She was incredibly organised and she was great with the paperwork and the forms, which I struggled with. Lauren was doing a course at university at the time, a postgrad diploma in not-for-profit studies. So she really helped us look at some of the ideas around fundraising and governance. And I think I just had this vision that I wouldn't shut up about, and I just kept banging on and talking about all these ideas. But we definitely, too, bonded over a friendship of that shared experience. And I think quite often when we caught up, our conversations would go off on lots of tangents, because while we were talking about this idea of First Light and this charity, we were also still rebuilding our lives, whether that be considering dating or navigating social situations with friends or work. It was sort of a really unique friendship that turned into a great trio as an organisation.
And Beck, I certainly was, when I became a widow, totally surprised at the number of young widows in Australia. And the figure is much larger, I think, than people would realise. So to not have a support network in place already would have seemed quite bizarre, I suppose, at the time when you were looking for that help.
Absolutely. As I said, I felt like I was the only one. I didn't know anyone else who was widowed young, and people in the media, people in movies. It wasn't until I started doing some research and I looked at the census data and I saw that there were 1 million widowed people in Australia, and 55,000 of them were under the age of 55. So that was way more than I had considered. And then I realised that we're not just talking about the odd person here or there who's going to struggle. We're talking about significant numbers within communities. And I think I was quite vocal within my own network around my experience as a young widow. And I started to get people reach out to me, whether it was colleagues from old jobs or old school friends. And they would reach out and say, oh, hey, Beck, sorry to bother you, but my neighbour's just lost her husband, or a guy I work with's wife has just died from breast cancer, and I really don't know how to support them. It's not the kind of thing that we're used to navigating. Grief is such an uncomfortable topic, and we're so used to platitudes and, really unhelpful comments like, oh, they're in a better place and time heals all wounds. And I think people knew that just wasn't really helpful, but they didn't really know how to be helpful. So that idea came of, not only do we want to support widowed people, but we want to help everyday Australians realise that this grief is all around us and we're not going to stop people from dying, but how can we actually be helpful and practical? So we created a section on our website called Someone I Care About is Widowed, and we started talking about how to provide help and support in a really meaningful way.
So let's take a closer look at the support that you do offer. First of all, you started as a small charity. You've grown over the years, marking the 9th anniversary this year. So how has it evolved and what kind of community has grown around First Light?
So we were registered in 2016. That's when we finally got everything organised, lodged the paperwork, and were recognised as a charity in Queensland. For the first 6 years, we were fully volunteer run. In that time, as I mentioned, we were all rebuilding our own lives and navigating jobs, and First Light was a project we were doing part-time in our spare time. But a couple of years ago, we received funding from an incredible philanthropist who gave us the ability to put 2 people into paid positions. So we now have business hours that we can provide support, and we have dedicated resources to building our programs. So when we did start in 2016, we had 17 members, and we now have thousands of members, and our programs have expanded to the point where we support thousands of widowed people every year from all around Australia. So one of the things we've done this year to recognise that is we've changed our governance structure from a Queensland registered charity to a nationally registered charity to recognise that there are widowed people all around Australia looking for this same support. And I think something that surprised me along this time is I kept assuming that while I hadn't found a dedicated charity that could provide the support I was looking for, I think I just assumed that something would happen, whether it was a government department would create some resources or someone else would come along and create a charity. But we're really now still the only dedicated national charity supporting widowed people in Australia. So we just realised we have to keep stepping into this space because people really need the support.
It's remarkable that is the case, considering those numbers that you mentioned earlier. So you obviously support in terms of you can go to the website, you can learn lots of information, you can connect with people. What are some of the things that First Light does offer for widowed people particularly?
Yeah, definitely. A good place to start is our website, and there's a button there that will say, how can I find help? What support do you offer? We send out newly widowed packs, which are hard copy folders with fact sheets. We send them out free of charge because they're fully covered by donations and grants. And these are a resource that I think we wished someone handed us when we were first widowed. The topics covered in there are things like how to navigate anniversaries and big milestone dates like Christmas and birthdays, how to support children who are grieving while also looking after yourself. What is self-care? People talk to me a lot about self-care in the early days, and I didn't know, did that mean go and get a massage or, am I supposed to go and get my nails done? And then I realised, no, it's about giving myself permission to drop the ball and how to just move my body every day and how to get out in the sunshine, like really basic steps that improved my own mental health. So these topics are covered quite broadly, but they're in hard copy because we know that when you're grieving, quite often it's hard to retain information. And if I read something on a website, I might think a week or two later, gosh, where did I read that? And what was the advice again? So we send these out and they can sit on the coffee table or the bedside table and be scribbled on. We also run peer support programs, including an online support forum that has around 1,500 members and a number of subgroups for dedicated communities, such as the LGBTQI plus community, a men's online group, and a young widowed group under the age of 50, and an older widowed group over the age of 50, because we found that while people were really appreciating the support of our community in general, there's these sub-communities that really wanted to connect with others who shared some of those more nuanced experiences. We also have our local catch-ups program, and these are informal, non-structured coffee and lunch catch-ups that happen in different different locations around Australia. They're hosted by widowed people from our community who volunteer to be a point of contact for others in their local area, so people can catch up once a month over a cup of tea and sit down and have a chat with others nearby.
Beck, it's an incredible organisation that you and Lauren and Karen established, and many of us have had the benefit of getting to know you and be a part of this community. You must have come across hundreds of people sharing hundreds of stories. Are there, a story or two that, I don't know, sits with you and it really shows the impact that First Light has had for them?
Oh, you're right. There's probably so many. I actually was talking at an event recently with a lot of widowed people who'd never met another widow, and they were feeling really anxious. And I saw so much of myself in that room. And I said, I actually think I know more than 1,000 widows personally now, widows and widowers, because we have men in our programs as well. But so many stories. Often after an event, I'll go away and I'll think about some of the people I've met and some of the change I might have seen in them. But I remember a young mum saying to me once that she really was struggling. She wasn't parenting her kids well. She'd been seeing a doctor regularly and a counsellor regularly, and she just really felt like nothing was working. And she attended one of our conferences and said at the end, that was what I needed, and I didn't really even know it existed. But she said, in hindsight, looking back, after connecting with others and hearing from widowed people who could really relate to what she was experiencing, she's now a better mum, she's a better employee, she's a better friend. And she said that she was really surprised that even though First Light doesn't offer clinical resources like counselling and grief counselling, just by being part of a community and feeling validated, it had helped her more than all of the other tactics that she'd tried. And I think I really related to that personally as well. Not that I'm not a strong advocate for counselling and healthcare services, but I think it's one of those things that all the help can be important and everything has its place. And for me, I still felt like I was the only person trying to navigate something and I was doing it wrong. It's really nice to talk to someone else and see that actually I'm not doing it wrong. I'm really doing a great job, because this is such a hard thing to navigate and there is no manual and there is no correct way to do it. So we often feel like we're not doing well when we really, really are.
Over the years of watching the impact and the change that First Light has made and the conversations that you've had, many, many of them, could you have imagined where the organisation and where you would have ended up all these years later after losing Dan?
No, I don't think I could have. And I think my family, while they were so supportive, I think they thought that this was a phase I was going through and something I need to get out of my system. And I know that they're really proud and probably a little bit surprised that this far along I'm still doing this work. But we've had some really hard times, particularly around funding and resourcing. It's very hard to run a charity in Australia. It's very hard to fund the work that we do. But I just couldn't stop, despite having moments where I thought, oh my gosh, I can't do this. This is too hard. I couldn't stop because no one else was doing something. So definitely, I don't expect that this would have been my job. And I think when Dan died, if someone said to me that I would go on to run a charity for widowed people, I probably would have been horrified at the idea. It's not really an ambition that you set out for as a young person, but I just find it so rewarding and I can't imagine doing anything else now.
Well, we're very fortunate that you have done exactly what you've done and that you continue to do so. I do wonder though, grief, there's no start and end. How do you balance your own healing with the emotional work of supporting others and being in this day in, day out?
Yeah, I think I've gotten a lot better at it. For me, when I work with First Light and talk to widowed people, it's not so personal for me anymore. I still think of Dan every day and I still cry regularly. I still have a lot of my own grief that I know I'll carry with me forever. But the work that I do isn't really about honouring him or it's not about my own journey anymore. It really is about creating support for those who I know are going to continue to find themselves in that really horrifying situation. And despite the tough days and the emotional days, there are definitely times I have conversations with people and I carry that home with me. But knowing that we're making a difference and that people aren't finding their way through on their own is what really keeps driving us to keep going. I think once we saw those statistics around how many people are widowed, as well as other data we've seen showing that 62% of young widowed people are financially insecure, 68% experience low mental well-being with probable depression. Like, we really know that the work is important, and that if widowed people can feel supported, they can start taking healthy steps forward and rebuild really happy, full lives and participate in society, and they won't just get lost in their grief.
As we mentioned, First Light is marking its 9th anniversary this year. It's been an incredible undertaking and continues to do great work. But as you also said, running a charity is difficult, and in terms of funding, that can be a challenge. I guess if you have the First Light wish list, what's on it for you at the moment, and how you see things going forward?
I think one of the things we'd really like to achieve is that people can find First Light within the first 72 hours of being widowed. I know I often think about how amazing it would have been if someone handed me one of our flyers in those really early days, whether that had have been the police officer that came to the door, the funeral director who sat in my lounge room and showed me brochures of coffins, or my GP. I really wish someone had have said, look, when you're ready, there's a community and an organisation that has some support and resources for you. And we're often told by people who find us later on that, I wish I knew about First Light in the first few weeks or months rather than, the 18-month mark. So we're really hoping to do a big awareness campaign this year to make First Light more of a household name, just the way that Beyond Blue might be if somebody is struggling with depression or Lifeline. If someone's widowed, we want someone within their network to say, right, well, here's a brochure for First Light. You need to get in touch with this website. Also, we really want to expand our programs. We've got so many ideas of different ways to support widowed people and different ways to make a tangible difference. But with only 2 staff, we're always really stretched. So we're hoping to continue the fundraising so that we can build our team and build our impact.
Gosh, and that community can really help. So for anyone who is currently in the community or wants to join and be a part in terms of volunteering, I guess you're always taking volunteers?
Definitely, yeah. There are so many ways that people can help us. Most of these are available on our website, whether it's volunteering, and there are opportunities for widowed people and non-widowed people, fundraising, sponsorship, even leaving us a gift in your will as a bequest. There's so many different ways that people can make a meaningful contribution to the work we do.
Now, everyone's story is big, and yours certainly is, and we haven't even touched on it, but I will ask you the question because you spoke about after you lost Dan and getting to that 2-year mark and, I might actually, want to repartner, and I do want to have children. So tell us about Beck today and what your life looks like all these years on.
Yeah, my life does look really different today. And again, nothing that I would have really believed would be possible in those early stages. But I did remarry. I've got a wonderful husband called Nick, who I met around the 3-year mark after losing Dan. And we've gone on to have 2 children. Got Archie, who's 7, and Theo, who's 5. So I juggle my work with being a mum to 2 energetic, boisterous boys. So my life is pretty chaotic and loud and messy and just full of joy, really. It's I don't think I would have understood that I could have this level of happiness after losing Dan. But of course, we get stronger at carrying the grief, and it doesn't go away, but our lives keep going and we start building around the loss.
And you said that you do think of Dan every day. You carry him with you. So where does he fit into your family now?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of time, and my children never got to meet him, obviously, but we have photos of him all through our house, and my boys refer to him as Uncle Dan, mainly because all of his nephews call him Uncle Dan, and so that's how they talk to him. They know that I was married before Dad, and I think it's something that's been unique to navigate in that they've been to Dan's grave, they've seen me cry, they know that on the big days like anniversaries and birthdays that I'm usually a little bit sadder than usual, but I actually think it's been quite healthy for them to understand that death is a part of life. They're obviously, like all kids that start to learn about death, it can be quite overwhelming and scary, and they often talk about the fact that they don't want to die, they don't want me to die. But we just talk about the fact that everyone is born and everyone dies, and in between we try and live the biggest, happiest lives that we can. So it's created an opportunity for us to try and help our children understand that death is inevitable at some point. Not that we really dwell on it, but I think it's really shown them too that, despite having the sadness of grief, you can carry that hand in hand with the joys of life.
I love that. Well, look, we started talking about Dan, and I'd like to finish with 3 questions, and I'm going to lead off with one about him. What do you like to do to remember Dan?
Oh, that's a great question. I think about him so many different ways, but a really special one, I guess, things that I do on the big dates is I have a scotch, and because Dan loved drinking scotch, it was something that he felt was quite sophisticated, and he grew a taste for scotch, and he just loved learning about different types of scotch. So on a special day, I'll have a scotch and I'll light a candle, and I talk to him most days, whether that's about something funny that's happened or a new song that I've heard. But yeah, I guess he is such a big part of my life. But on those special days, I probably have a scotch and light a candle.
I love that. What's something that you say to someone who's newly widowed? And obviously you have great experience in this, having run First Light, but even someone who doesn't know what to say, what is it, that you would say to someone who's newly widowed in those very early moments?
I remember someone giving me some advice that really stuck with me, and that is you don't need to find your way forward. You don't need to see the horizon right now, but just take it one moment at a time, whether that is 10-minute intervals or 1-hour intervals. I remember so many days where I'd be at work and it just felt like the pain was crippling and I wasn't going to be able to make it through the day. And I'd think to myself, just get through the next 20 minutes. And I'd look at the clock and go, right, 20 minutes, you can do 20 minutes. And then at that next interval, I'd say, right, you can get through the next 20 minutes, just focus on these small bites. And I think that when we find ourselves in those early days, the world's fallen out from beneath us, and it's such a feeling of I'm sinking and I'm drowning, and grief can come in those waves. So in between, just find your breath and find peace for that little moment if you can, and just ride the waves, because looking into the horizon is so out of reach, but you'll get there, just not today. It's one of those things, so just focus on today, getting through the day.
Yeah. And just finally, is there a quote that resonates with you most at this point in your journey?
There is a quote that I've got written on my wall, and it's, don't let the sadness of your past or the fear of your future ruin the happiness of your present. And I think that's quite relevant for me, because as a young widow who has remarried and gone on to have children, knowing that death is something that can come at any minute is something that I have to live with, and that can be really scary. So when I did remarry, one of the biggest fears was that, of course, I would be widowed again and I'd lose Nick. And then becoming a mum, I'm such a worrier about different things that might happen to their boys throughout their lives in a way that I think some of my friends who aren't widowed just don't think. Like, it's almost like my head is a slightly darker place and I'm not as naive around the pain of grief, but I try not to get caught up in that. So I know that the only day we have guaranteed is today, and I try and not get lost in the pain of the past or worries for the future, and just make the most of what I have today.
What a beautiful place to end our chat, Beck. You're an inspiration, and on behalf of all the young widows in Australia or anyone else who comes across First Light, thank you so much for chatting.
Thank you, Caroline. What an exciting podcast to be part of.
Thank you to all my guests for sharing their stories so generously. The Widow Diaries is hosted and produced by me, Caroline Winter, from Pod Talk for First Light Widowed Support, which provides information, resources and connection for young widowed people throughout Australia. Follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode, and you can also find out more information at firstlight.org.au. This podcast acknowledges and celebrates the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which stories have been told for thousands of years, and on which this podcast is recorded.